Today's guest leads one of the world's greatest marvels, Klyde Warren Park, a green space on top of a highway. And she wants a lot more of them. So do I. Let's listen in. Welcome to Decision Points. I'm Doug Hudson.
I'm Scott Wood.
Man, welcome Kit Sars, President and CEO of Klyde Warren Park, one of my absolute favorite things Dallas has ever done.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I mean, whose vision was that?
So it was several people who really came together, and it was a public-private partnership. But I guess you could say that originally the first Eric Johnson, mayor of Dallas, had the foresight to build Woodall Rogers in a recessed way so that it could eventually have something like a park on top of it.
Seriously, the original vision did contemplate something on top of it.
Without necessarily having the engineering know-how, but
Right.
being able to predict the future enough to know that that kind of thing might be possible. Yes, it was. So it's been, as you know, Woodall Rogers has been a dividing line between uptown and downtown. And so kind of in the early 2000s, there were several people really talking about how can we take advantage of uptown being so thriving and fix the downtown situation where at 5 o'clock every day there was a mass exodus, right, of people leaving. People weren't living down there really yet, maybe a few thousand. And the idea was to build a park right on top of Woodall Rogers, connect the two, and then the people who were simultaneously thinking about it included Jody Grant, who founded Texas Capital Bank, and his wife Sheila, who traveled around the country looking at different parks and really settled on a model like Bryant Park in New York,
Yep.
which has the outdoor, Christmas market and has this programming that a guy named Dan Biederman got started for them years ago. And that really became the model so that not only would it be this highway, this kind of a deck park, a park over a highway, but it would also be busy. It would be programmed. So Jody and Sheila, and then also John Zog was thinking about this at the same time. And then John and Jody connected, and they initially got the funding. Texas Capital Bank put up $1 million. The Real Estate Council put up $1 million, and Jody and Sheila put up $1 million. And the $3 million of seed funding enabled a feasibility study to be created to figure out if this could be done. And then that was about in 2004, probably. And here we are, 20 years later.
Gosh, has it been 20 years?
Isn't that
Yeah.
crazy?
That is amazing.
So when can we get one over Central? And when can we get one? How do we just overlay a green park over all of us?
Well, it's crazy to think. I cannot tell you the number of people from other parts of the country who come visit Klyde Warren Park, come visit Dallas, but in particular the park, to try to create something like it, because not only has it stitched communities back together, because it goes way beyond uptown and downtown, right? I mean, we have 1.3 million visitors a year, which is more than, if you add up every home, Stars game, Cowboys game, and Mavericks game, it's more than that. But also because the economic impact has been incredible. So there are more than 70 of these deck parks being contemplated
Really?
or in various stages across the country and beyond that around the world. So Southern Gateway, which is now being renamed Halperin Park, right next to the zoo, is halfway built as a deck park. They're raising the rest of their money, and we both just got a grant from the Department of Transportation, us for our expansion, them for their original creation. But they're working on it, any place, and really that where the 345 situations being created. The idea for that is to create more connectivity, as well. But there's this whole really rails to trails movement across the country now. In fact, another thing that we're looking at more and more, which I think will be funny, in addition to being known for green space, which those of us, who've been in Dallas a long time, like, why would anyone come look at our green space? But we're super excited that that's catching on. But the pedestrian walkways that roads are turning into, the Champs-Élysées, obviously, and Times Square, kind of around there. And I just read in the New York Times yesterday, there's another whole section of Fifth Avenue that New York City wants to close down to make it pedestrian focused. So I do think there is a movement toward that. It'll take a little time and a lot of money, but we're all working on it together.
When does what's the name of the park by the zoo?
Halperin Park.
Okay, so we're not exactly sure quite when that would open.
So they need to finish the actual decks being built, which will take a couple of years, and then they need to raise the money for what's on top of the decks. But there's a woman named April Allen who is incredible, who is in charge of that project, and I have no doubt she will get it done.
Well, it looks like they've done about maybe half of the decking
so
far.
Yeah, they have. It's sometimes, certainly for Klyde Warren Park, it's easier for them that we've been built.
Correct.
And and it's sometimes just easier to have something that's a little bit of a visual and people start buying into it and understanding the possibilities more. So I think they were like, let's just go ahead and get this done, and then we'll get the rest of the funding when we can. And then one of the things that we're blessed with here in North Texas is a group called the North Central Texas Regional Council of Governments, Regional Transportation Council. There's a guy named Michael Morris. He's the one who put he's really the transportation czar for North Texas. He's the one who put the fedoras on the hats, going out to AT&T Stadium in honor of Tom Landry. He has really figured out a way to leverage federal and state funding to create infrastructure projects that are transportation focused in and around Dallas. For example, if a little town kind of right outside of Dallas needs $1 million to build a road, and they've got a federal grant, but they're not going to get it for 8 years, or they'll get a little bit at a time. He's really put together funding through this kind of program and kind of this low interest rate loan to groups like that. They can apply for the funding, get it immediately, build their road, and then pay it back when they get the federal funding. So Michael Morris, I just can't say enough good things about him. He's very focused on doing exactly what you're talking about, which is creating these deck caps, deck parks all around, and helping to connect the city more and more.
Well, and it sounds like it's one of the things that we're huge believers at True North is innovation. He's also, with all of you all, and collectively we're better together, obviously, but innovating even the financial model of how you get that done.
For sure. It's a very Texas, I think, thing to do.
Exact. Figure out the numbers.
Yeah, I mean,
make it work.
The state of Texas has a special events trust fund, for huge, to allow us to get Formula One, Super Bowl, things like that. We're very pro that kind of thing here in the state, which is fortunate.
It's pro business.
Yeah.
What you mentioned another grant coming for Klyde Warren Park. What's that going to be about?
So the first, the park was always contemplated to be bigger than it is. And, the 2007 financial crisis hit, and again, they were like, let's just get this part built. In fact, the fountain, the Nancy Best Fountain, which just opened up 2 years ago, was really, you'll remember, a triangular green patch, right on Pearl. Mm-hmm. Well, underneath that, there was the infrastructure for a fountain. I mean, there was tens of thousands of gallons vault for water and things like that for recycled water. They just didn't have the money for the fountain. They didn't have the design they liked, et cetera. In addition, always part of that was expanding further west. So in front of the Hunt Building and all the way over to the U-turn that goes down in front of El Phoenix over there. Mm-hmm. So
Phoenix, you owe us.
Sorry, I'm doing all sorts of shout outs.
It's amazing. That's the best El Phoenix on the planet, by the way.
No, it's great. So they raised about $100 million from of public money to build the decks. You can't really build the deck part from private funding because they're not naming opportunities, right? So there was City of Dallas bond election money. There was Obama stimulus money, thanks to Eddie Bernice Johnson. Kind of different money cobbled together, right, to create that North Central Texas Council of Governments, basically TxDOT money. Okay. To create the part, it was $60 million, for the public, and then $40 million for the private. So about $100 million project, roughly, is what the first part cost. So The plan's the same to go ahead and start with this expansion. Now, we were all excited, and we announced it a few years ago, and we'd gotten the public funding, we were shovel ready, we had the designs, and then COVID hit. So we regrouped with COVID. We didn't think it was the right time to be, bullish on this kind of thing. And we went out for bid post-COVID. At the same time, post-COVID inflation had hit, right? And so the cost of steel, for example, had gone up 300%. Wow. Well, that's what those beams are made of that go over the highway, right? Yeah. So we've been doing some value engineering and trying to figure out how and if, frankly, this expansion could happen or this true completion. And we've been able to get together about $80 million, including 20 from the Department of Transportation, that was that TxDOT applied for us for in conjunction with Southern Gateway and two other projects in Dallas, North Texas. One's in McKinney and one's over by the convention center where all that work's going to be done. And so we are in the process of kind of closing that gap. We're hoping if all goes well, we might be able to go back out for bid early next year, maybe in the second quarter next year, get the bids back third quarter. And if all things go incredibly well, they were all suffering from a little PTSD after the last time around.
I bet.
You could start seeing construction for that fourth quarter next year. And what that would do is that would add an additional 1.7 acres to Klyde Warren Park. Wow. The first deck you would see, which would be between Akron and St. Paul, right in front of the Hunt building, would have a building on it. Mm-hmm. And it would give us indoor space to be able to use for a backup venue for people. We could have a wedding in the park. You don't really want to have a wedding in the park right now because there's no backup venue in case the weather doesn't cooperate, right? It'll be an opportunity to, again, work with nonprofits for them to have big events, corporations, all sorts of different things, additional programming. And then across Akron would be an additional deck that actually would be artificial turf. So it would really give us a chance to create a true event venue space with anchor points for tents and things like that. Yep. It would allow us to rest the real grass on the main Ginsberg family Great Lawn that we have in the park right now, and flip things quickly, with these different tent configurations. So we could have, a Oktoberfest, we could have fashion shows, we could have...
Pause right there.
Yeah. We could have
we could have
Oktoberfest. We could have fashion shows. We could have book festivals. One of the plans we'd like to do, and what we would build into the deck proper, the way we built the fountain infrastructure into the deck, that original part, would be to have some things that we could have an ice skating rink, an outdoor ice skating rink, maybe 2 months a year, so that people could come check out skates for $5 and then be able to skate, in kind of half of December through Valentine's Day, which would be really fun. There are a lot of opportunities that, other cities have things like this that we really don't. And we never really had a town square kind of central area until Klyde Warren Park. So it's exciting. So fingers crossed it all goes well. We'll get the public funding, we hope, start the construction, and then start raising money for what's on top.
Incredible work. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What are the early years like for Kit?
So I am from Dallas. Originally, I was born at Baylor Hospital. My parents moved here from, my parents were both from Louisiana. My father was from Baton Rouge. My mom was from New Orleans. My father played Davis Cup tennis for the U.S.
No way.
And was a Rhodes Scholar.
So what years was he playing?
In the 50s. Okay. He was number one in the U.S. He won NCAA title 2 years singles for Tulane, and then he was number one in the U.S. It was before professional tennis. It was all amateur tennis back then. But in the kind of mid to late 50s, he won it's now known as the U.S. Open. It was then known as Forest Hills. Yeah. He won doubles in that, and but he stopped at age 25. There was no money in it.
There was no money. Yeah.
And so he and my mother moved to Dallas after he did some different things, and he opened up the Smith Barney office in Dallas a million years ago. And he actually was also with Pressbridge, and Ken Langone told me at Ross Pro's funeral that my dad is the one who introduced Ken to Ross. So that's kind of just a fun part of the Dallas history. But so my parents moved here kind of late 50s, I guess, And I was born here. I have two older brothers. I went to St. Michael's School when I was little, and then ended up graduating from Hockaday in 1985, and then went to the University of Virginia for college. Took a year off, lived in London for a year, and worked at the BBC, and then came back and went to law school at SMU.
Did you know you always wanted to go to law school, or what led you to law school?
I didn't want to go to law school.
So why'd you go?
And I say that now I'm on the SMU Law School board. So shout out to SMU Law School. I loved it. And I met my husband there. I got my JD MRS. But I think honestly, my parents were divorced when I was 3. And I was raised very much to be prepared for my inevitable divorce. I just think that, and my mom was the generation that when women worked, I guess they could be, teachers and nurses. And so then it became women could be doctors and lawyers. And that was those, and she knew I couldn't be a doctor. I mean, I was an English major in college. There was just nothing about me that would be qualified scientifically for any of that. So she's like, you're going to law school. So in a lot of ways, I think she viewed it almost as finishing school.
Yep.
So I went, and it ended up, I think, really changing the trajectory of my career. I took the bar exam, I passed the bar exam, but I never practiced law a day in my life. I graduated from law school and went to work for SMU running the Tate Lecture Series and the SMU Athletic Forum and Doak Walker Award, which I did for the next 10 years.
Man, what experiences did you take away from that? I mean, you guys have been such a thought leader in this community, but how'd you approach that, Kit? What are some experiences? Maybe give a little bit of background of those two, Tate Lecture and Doak Walker. Give a little background, and then I'd love for just take a few minutes and walk us through some of the maybe highs and lows of those years.
So you and I were talking a little before about an expression you use, get better or get bitter. When I graduated from law school, all my friends and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, were going on to these incredible jobs, right? And I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd had experience in college doing event planning and kind of PR and marketing a little bit. And for whatever reason, Bill Lively, who's one of my mentors to this day, who ran the Super Bowl when it was here, raised all the money for the AT&T Performing Arts Center, has done incredible things. He was a vice president at SMU. He started the Tate Lecture Series, and he started the SMU Athletic Forum in the throes of the death penalty to get SMU back in the newspaper in a positive way.
Interesting. I love origin stories. Had no idea.
Yeah,
they literally coming on the heels of the death penalty.
For sure. And he was a band guy at SMU. He wasn't even the athlete. He came from the band and started. So we just tease him to this day that he started this incredible athletic program and fundraiser for the school. And I was 26, I think, at the time. And he hired me to run both those projects. I probably was completely unqualified, but we had an incredible, for whatever reason, he believed in me. We had an incredible, time together doing those programs. The way that SMU has pulled in the Dallas community.
You're a pro.
Something's
going on.
Usually
we don't ever get that.
No, usually doesn't
we get
happen
it at the park
twice.
all the time. So I just didn't know if you want me to talk through it before.
No, you're great.
But the SMU has done an incredible job pulling in the Dallas community, and and people not from Dallas, right? There's so many people here who've moved here for jobs and just stayed. And SMU has found a way to pull in people who are nowhere near their own alma maters and find a place for them. And the Tate Lecture Series, in a lot of ways, in particular, and the SMU Athletic Forum to a lesser extent, were a little bit of a doorway to pull these people into SMU to then find their place, whether it was the engineering school or perhaps the Perkins School of Theology or something, right, that they might really find a passion for. So it was just an amazing way to tap into people as they were starting to move to Dallas, and I enjoyed every minute. Our board was terrific. It's still obviously thriving today. my first year, which was, I think, the 92, 93 season, my speakers were Colin Powell, Margaret Thatcher, I think Norman Schwarzkopf. I mean, It was pretty heady. Yeah. And it was back in the days where I was driving these people around. Like, the liability situation hadn't really entered into the equation yet. And so we had a company that would, another shout out, Sewell Lexus, who would provide us with cars. And I would go over and pick these people up at their hotel and drive them to SMU. It was kind of crazy to think about.
We got to have a couple of stories.
Well, it was funny because David Gergen now does he moderates a panel discussion for the first lecture each year in the fall. And, he was set to do one the day of 9/11. So I'll come back to that one. That obviously was canceled, and he ended up being on the news that night. But one of the first ones, I can't remember, it was John Sununu and someone else. And I remember I was driving them in the car from the hotel to SMU, and they were all buddy in the car and talking about where are you going to be next and whatever. And then they get on the stage, and it was,
attack.
Yeah, I mean, very civilly,
Correct,
compared to how things have gone lately.
Yeah, well said.
But vehemently disagreed with each other. Then they'd get back in the car and they'd be back to buddy, and drive back. So that was kind of interesting to be the driver fly on the wall. 9/11 was interesting. That was again one of those lectures because it was September, right? It was the first lecture of the season, and I don't remember who the lecturers were that evening, but David Gergen had helped select them, and they were, all flying down that morning. Well, obviously, all the flights were canceled, everything. We obviously canceled the lecture that night, but the way we had to do it back then was, there was no email, there was no texting, there was no quick way. So we literally called 1,000 ticket holders.
Wow.
Now, we probably didn't need to in hindsight because everybody knew by the end of the day that it was canceled and everyone was kind of glued to their TVs that evening. But all three of our talking head, speakers were on TV, weighing in. I mean, they were all either in Washington or Boston or New York, and so they were all on TV that night. But it was an incredible. I mean, just driving Norman Schwarzkopf around. I was like, this. What?
Did y'all talk?
Absolutely. Just he and I were the only ones in the car. I mean, it could not have been nicer. Bob Dole was another really just incredibly nice person. He wanted to go to the VA hospital, so I drove him down to the VA hospital. Just he and I went. He went and visited, with all the veterans there. Of course, none of no media around for any of that. I drove Stephen Hawking around.
Unbelievable.
We had to rent a van to accommodate him and his wheelchair and his staff. He traveled with a team. I took them to Chip's Hamburgers because they wanted a burger, the one that was over on like the Knox Henderson area.
Yeah.
I literally drove the van. I actually backed it up into the fence behind me, right by Chip's. But I turned it in, and no one was the wiser. But they all thought it was the funniest thing ever.
It's incredible.
But yeah, it was an incredible experience to be able to be part of.
So did you know, year 2 in law school or even year 1 that you were not going to practice law, but that you knew you had to get this education to either to please mom or for whatever reason? But
yes, that's exactly right.
You were already looking for, okay, I'm not going to practice law, so I got to figure out something else.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And things started to become more and more available then.
Sure.
But I knew how to organize. I knew how to do event planning. I learned how to raise money, but I never did any kind of formal training in any of those areas. It just all ended up kind of culminating into that world, which then led me to my next position, which was running a foundation. So I really, one of the things that was great about SMU, I started having my kids toward the end of my time there. And one of the things I knew I wanted to do was work full time. And one of the things I realized at that time about working in nonprofit is I was going to be able to have a flexibility to raise my children the way I would not if I were in the corporate world. Now things have changed, and you can do that more as a working woman in the corporate structure now, but not back at that time.
Right.
And so going into nonprofit, not having a nonprofit career, there's things you sacrificed. Obviously, the pay is not the same as it would be for a corporate job, but it really allowed me to do everything I wanted. And gosh, Dallas is an incredible place to be involved in the nonprofit world. This is the most generous community, I think, anywhere, and people really get the idea of of giving back, and it's fun to be part of.
Mm-hmm. Is there a metric in top 50, 100 cities in the U.S. that donate the most money or raise the most money?
They're probably, I don't know, I'm not aware of that. One of the metrics that I do know, and I think we're number one in this, is the former athletes who are on our teams stay here.
Yeah.
They don't go back to where they're from. The Dallas Cowboys in particular, and they all get involved with what's going on, and they all give back. And having worked later on with the Super Bowl, that doesn't happen in these other markets.
You said you learned how to raise money. What are the keys to raising money?
Well, different people have success doing it different ways. For me, I really just have much more of a collaborative style. And so where I am now with the park, and we're a nonprofit. Klyde Warren Park is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's not a city park. The land we've created is owned by the city, and we have basically what is kind of a 90-year lease, really, with the city to privately manage. But I compare us sometimes to like a PBS model. So we raise money from individuals and foundations and corporations, and we push out free programming to the community. So my budget's about $6.5 million each year, and I don't have a development director. I mean, I do the fundraising. But what I'm able to do now is really co-create what is mutually beneficial, hopefully for businesses, especially with all the businesses right around Klyde Warren Park who want to get involved, who have us on their website. We're part of their marketing materials now, right? They're calling that whole area on the north side of the park, starting with the Federal Reserve to Texas Capital Bank to Bank of America, is going in right there, to First United Bank, to the Goldman campus down by the Pro Museum, to JP Morgan Chase across the street. They're calling that Y'all Street. That is the kind of the true Y'all Street within the Dallas itself. It's becoming a central business district. So companies that want to get involved in that way, and to a network, it's a great, we have a corporate council. We pull in people that helps with fundraising. Our Friends of Klyde Warren Park program are, because we don't charge a gate. We're not like the other arts district institutions where we make any kind of money on ticket sales. Everything's free. So I've created some different programs around sponsorships, around a Friends of Klyde Warren Park program. But I really went around to people from whom I was going to be asking for money to say, what are you looking for? What do you want to see? And for the corporate council, for example, it's just like a small kind of case study. They wanted different things, but I heard this. I started hearing the same things over and over again. Some wanted hospitality, some wanted branding, some wanted employee engagement, some wanted diversity, equity, inclusion opportunities. Some wanted networking. So those were the bullets. You got a little bit of everything, right?
That's what they wanted from Klyde Warren?
From an that's what would make them want to be part of an organization, because no matter how generous they were, it needed to somehow help with the bottom line or help with one of their goals, right?
There needed to be a why.
Multiple ones. Sorry?
There needed to be a why.
Exactly, yeah. And so anyway, that's been, and we had between last year and this year, we had a 100% renewal rate from our sponsors.
Amazing.
So I think the co-creation certainly has helped me. It's more like looking for a strategic partnership than just going with my hands out.
So if your $6.5 million budget is 100% of that raised through corporate giving, or give individuals and foundations and
about
corporations?
$5 million of that is raised that way. We get $1.5 million. It's up to $1.6 million a year now through something called the Public Improvement District. So Dallas has maybe 15 or 20 of these TIFs or PIDs where people can pay extra as part of their tax for property ownership to make their neighborhood extra clean or safe or active. And so we share one with the Dallas Arts District, and that generates about 1.6 million a year.
Okay.
So I don't have to go out every January 1st with $0 and 0 cents in my pocket. That helps. The additional money comes from our fundraiser, which we actually had last week, which raises about $1 million a year. These 2 membership programs. When you eat at Mi Casina or our food trucks, that helps Klyde Warren Park. We have we get percentage of gross or kind of rent and percentage rent from those guys. So all that kind of puts together sponsorships of events, renting portions of the park. That kind of cobbles together what is our annual budget.
Okay, great.
Okay, I understand that your mom was a former nun who became the editor of 17 magazine.
My stepmother, actually.
Your stepmother.
My stepmother. So that's true. That's a true story.
Walk us through that. And has that had impact on you, or is it not?
No, it has. So my parents divorced when I was 3, and my father met my stepmother in New York, and they married when I was like 6 or 7. So my stepmother, yes, was raised in Southern California, and she, big Catholic family, and she was a nun and a high school teacher. So she taught like Mary Tyler Moore. She taught Bob Hope's kids.
Oh, wow.
And she said,
this is in New York.
This is in L.A.
This is in L.A. Okay,
L.A. So she was a nun in a convent in L.A. And then they were like the crazy nuns who would go barefoot on the beach in their habits, and so I think it was a little bit shocking back then.
Yeah.
But she ended up having a lot of stress as part of that. She ended up having some issues, including some psychosomatic blindness. She wrote a whole book about it, and called The Buried Life. And she ended up moving to New York, completely kind of starting over. And so she worked her way up in the magazine business to being editor-in-chief, of 17 magazine. And so I got to meet, Phoebe Cates back when she was first she put Phoebe Cates on her first cover. She had braces on the cover of 17, however long ago. And yes, I think having her as a role model, in addition to my mother, but in a very high-powered career situation. She was one of the few female editors in New York City. I learned a lot from her, and it was interesting to be there and to observe and see how she ran things. So for sure, she was a definite influence.
Yeah, and that one struck a chord. My oldest daughter interned one summer for 17 in New York, and just, again, the exposure to leaders, female and male, and just the corporate and the business. She just thrived. She loved every bit of it. So, it's interesting. What are, Kit, you have been incredibly successful. The organizations you've built, you led, the teams, they're so high profile. There's a young lady watching, listening to the podcast today. What are principles for them? What in your mind are there still hurdles? Are there not hurdles anymore? Where are we in that phase of the journey of successful and careers for men and women? Where are we in that whole world?
Well, it's interesting. Things are changing so quickly, and I have 2 daughters, 24. 23 and 20. 24. She did just turn 24. It's hard to remember.
People ask me all the time, all my kids are, I say, I can tell you when they're born.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
do the math.
Exactly. I hope she's not watching. She will not like that. But, the 24-year-old is a computer science major from Duke. And the world is changing so quickly with that. I don't even understand her resume, to be honest with you. So I don't know if I'm the expert on young people. However, I do feel like that you don't, as my mom used to say, throw out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, just because things are moving quickly does not replace, a handwritten thank you note. It does not replace learning how to write just because AI is around to help. It does not replace, just really meeting people in the workplace to differentiate yourself from the masses. I mean, I recommend my younger daughter applying for an internship. I said, go to their office and say, I sent my resume in, but I just wanted you all to put a face with a name, so that I'm truly interested in this. I think that it's all about differentiating yourself somehow. This is the generation that doesn't use phones, right? They email everybody, and they're a little scared of the phone. I mean, they use the phones a lot, but not to call people, right?
Correct. But not to talk. Yes.
Right.
Not to talk.
Exactly. So I think almost going back to kind of an old school way of differentiating yourself is smart to get into the world. And as much as I am incredibly in favor of, and it's about time, a balance in the workplace, which, as I told you, I strove to have, being a mom of kids and wanting to have time to spend with them, and very in favor of the balance around mental health. There are some years where putting in a little bit of extra work differentiates you.
That's right.
And so I think that those things should not be, just because the clock strikes 5, which they won't even know what that means because clocks don't strike anymore. Maybe stay till 5:30, maybe stay till 6. I mean, still try to get your workout in and everything, but maybe not 7 days a week, just to try to. So I do think that history is like that. We kind of we go like this before we even out. And so I just think that holding on to those things is important, and it just establishes work ethic, right? That's the most important thing. You can pretty much learn anything, except for me with science, as I shared earlier. But I think just proving you have a work ethic, so that I also try to tell them, look, people are looking to hire people who are going to make their lives easier, not somebody who they're going to have to chase around, So show them that. Show how you're going to make their lives easier, that you're going to be the one following up. You're going to be the one reminding them. You're going to be the one having their back. I was like, that's how you get and keep a job.
You've got, Alicia's obviously very successful in her business. You've got 3 daughters. What?
It all resonates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you react to any of that?
I think my advice to my girls is just go find something that you're really passionate about and that you're gifted at, right? So if you want to be a lawyer, I have one in law school right now, and she swears she will not practice one day of law in her life. And I said, that's okay. You don't need to practice law for that law school education to be valuable for you. You need to go find something that you're really passionate about. And she wants to be an author and write books. And I said, your law degree will pay dividends for you over decades, again, whether or not you practice law or not. So, my advice to them has always been, find something that you're passionate about. My middle, I think, is probably a little bit more on a corporate path. It'll be a little bit more of a traditional path in terms of starting, at a lower level and maybe working her way up. And at some point, maybe starting her own business. And then my youngest is very much of this entrepreneurial mindset, and kind of the world's her oyster, and she'll figure something out.
They're like little science experiments, aren't they? They just all turn out differently. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Mine are very different too.
But some would say, don't, like, that's folly to go chase your passion, and because what if it doesn't turn out to be? And I'm kind of like, if you love it.
Dallas, I don't know what's going on today.
Like 4 times today.
But this is spectacular.
Yeah.
I do feel very safe, however.
I mean,
this never happens.
Our services are...
Maybe once a day it happens.
Yeah.
But I say, if some people would say that chase your passion is folly because it may not be economically viable. But I'm like, if you love what you do, you're going to apply yourself because you love it. You'll be good at it because you've applied yourself, and then it'll be economically viable at some level, and you'll have to decide at what level you're satisfied with. So you may be an author and no one may read your books, and it may not be very economically viable, but you're happy, and you may be okay with that. Or you may be a super successful author, and we know lots of authors who've created unbelievable net worth. So to me, it's really about finding something that you're passionate about and that's fulfilling, because then it's not work. doesn't feel like work.
Well, especially in their 20s. I think that they get nervous that they all compare themselves to each other now, right, on social media. And this is the time to, you've got at least 10 years to do really whatever, as long as you can try to support yourself a little bit, world's your oyster.
Yes. And I think if you can experiment in your 30 or, in your 20s up until you're 30, like that's the time to do it because the cost is low. You make a lot of mistakes. Your lifestyle's not very expensive. You can go and do, and it's that's the time to experiment.
And I tell my girls also, you can have it all, just not necessarily all at the same time.
Or on your timeline, maybe.
Yeah, so you can sequence things. You could maybe your daughter maybe she ends up changing what she does, but she becomes a best-selling author at age 60. Who knows, right? There's plenty of time. That doesn't have to all happen immediately.
Sounds like my house. I always say we can do a lot of things, we just can't do everything.
And all at once.
Yes, that's right.
You mentioned something I thought was interesting. Work ethic. Is there, as you've thought about this, are there tricks? Are there tools? How do leaders, whether at Scott as CEO of True North or Kit as CEO and President Klyde Warren, or as a parent, whether it's at the office or at the home, how do you think we can instill work ethic?
I think that's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer to that other than, for me, it was I needed to work hard because I sometimes, to be honest, feel...
You needed because of finances, or you felt the drive, or both?
I didn't feel like I was smart enough. Like I honestly felt like I was one of those people who needed to work harder to get the same thing done as maybe somebody who came to it, and came to it more naturally.
Yep.
I've now started thinking, people who are just incredibly gifted naturally, it's probably a little harder for them to have a work ethic, right? And so I think that maybe trying to focus on things that, in addition to whatever your passion is, something that you're, if you're right-handed, write with the left hand for a little while, something to kind of offset it and really do that. I honestly, I think about that a lot with young people in particular, and other than just, if it's rewarding people with whom I'm working for that extra work ethic, or just trying to encourage and be the cheerleader when I see it. I honestly don't know the way to instill that. What I tell my girls, another one of kind of our sayings is, I always say, try hard and be nice. That's kind of our mantra. My older daughter would say that's our mantra. And to me, it's because both those things were things that she was in control of. So it had nothing to do with her natural intelligence or athletic ability or artistic ability or whatever, ability to be a good conversationalist. It was, she needed to try hard. I mean, that was just, and be nice. And if she did both those things, she would have, then she would, because they're so goal oriented, that she would have felt like she'd accomplished her objectives and felt like she could check that box. I mean, your point, it's interesting because it's a balance, because sometimes these kids work too hard, right? Yep. So it's a little bit more of a delicate generation. So it's trying to find that balance where you teach it, but also not at the expense of, again, their mental health.
Yep. Always finding that elusive balance and everything. One of the things, Kit, we talked about briefly before we got started that I wanted to, it seems like to me, you would have, in business and in life, we talk a lot about reps. You get this many reps because as we get reps in something, we should be getting better, right? We should be learning, iterating off of that process. A lot of our listeners and viewers are CEOs. They're founders. They're to me, you have had a significant amount of reps building relationships with CEOs. What are observations? What are maybe blind spots that you have? Are there common blind spots that you've seen in CEOs? What are some of your learnings? How could you coach us up as CEOs to be better at what we do?
Well, you flatter me to think that I know that, because I still feel like I'm on a lifelong journey of learning and would love to be an even better CEO myself. I think that everyone has their different style, right? I'm a firm believer in all the different types of tests that are available to everybody these days, whether it's strengths finders or all those things to understand ourselves.
Are you all
more.
using one at Klyde Warren now?
We use multiple ones.
Okay.
I love them, and it's taught me a lot about myself. It's to Scott's point a little bit about finding your passion or what you want to do, and then giving that your all. I think it's when I've seen my colleagues learn something like that about themselves, it's empowering, because you feel like, okay, well, no wonder I do that because I'm good at that, or no wonder I find that to be harder because I'm not as good at that. And then they have a little bit more understanding with each other. So, I'm a very collaborative leader. I like pulling in people from all around. I feel like, to your point about being better together, I feel like these partnerships are incredible, and make the everybody more successful. So I think if we could I think it's easy to share this information. It's harder to apply to yourself, but figuring out ways to leverage off of our relationships as much as possible and to work on things less in a silo is something I think we can all benefit from. It's time consuming, right? The relationships are time consuming, figuring out how to leverage it. But I actually think that's one of the things that Dallas is pretty good at, because we have, for whatever reason, similar to how I described SMU kind of, procuring this incredible group of now alumni who end up staying and making Dallas better. Dallas has attracted, I think, very like-minded people. I think our basketball team is the most aptly named team of any of our professional teams. And I think that there's a very maverick spirit of most everyone who is successful from a business perspective in Dallas. It's, a little bit of a, how can we do this? I just think that people don't really accept no. It's more like a, well, what's the workaround? Or, because we think big here. Yep. And it's exciting. So I think Dallas actually has that down. And I just had the Economic Council of Palm Beach County, about 50 of them in town last week. We have all these groups, as I've told you, coming from all around the country to visit the park, but they really came to meet with a lot of CEOs and a lot of our civic leaders who are involved in various kind of economic issues. And people are looking to Dallas now for what is it that we're doing right. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. Dallas had a chip on its shoulder for a long time about being a city that was a little bit lesser than, perhaps. But, we need to make sure that we don't get too big for our britches. Another saying of my mom's. When Fort Worth and Dallas agreed a number of years ago, despite all their differences, to be marketed together as a region, the trajectory of Dallas proper changed almost overnight. And we became one of the leading regions in the country. If Dallas were just by itself, who knows where it would be. And so I want to make sure that we as business leaders continue to encourage our civic leaders to be aware of what's going on in Collin County and in Fort Worth, but work together, leverage off of that, because we are in the catbird seat right now for what we could become, and I don't want to see us lose that.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible, really. I mean, you grew up here, I grew up here. Dallas to me did not feel like a big city. It just kind of felt like, it was a city, but it wasn't this. Now it feels like a massive city. And all of a sudden, for me, in the last 6-8 years, I look around and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hardly recognize this place. And you look, just up and down here, all the high rises that are going up. I was in New York last weekend with one of my daughters, and I'm like, we were walking around in one part of New York, and I was like, this is what uptown in Dallas is going to look like soon. And it's really incredible. And then the migration of everyone coming to Dallas, like we are in the catbird seat. There's a huge opportunity for Dallas and Fort Worth and the region to take advantage of what's going on. it's exciting.
And I like our personality here. I mean, I think that so I attended a few of the meetings with this Palm Beach group last week and heard others talking to them. And we are very willing to share our mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, we're very willing to, we get so excited people are coming to visit us. We kind of don't know what to do with ourselves. And we want them to have this incredible time. That they're all coming to visit us. Here. Yes. I think so. Within the past decade, and in particular, it's primarily driven by economic factors, right? Mm-hmm. Because we've survived so many ups and downs that other parts of the country have had a harder time recovering from, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to know, like, what is our secret?
What's going on?
Yeah, but in addition to just the willingness to try things and to work collaboratively, I really do think there's a comeback spirit that we have that we just don't get down. Yeah. And I hope we hold on to that special magic within our growth.
Well, you mentioned it earlier, talking about Y'all Street, and there's a book. I think it was Michael Lewis's book, Liar's Poker, one of his very original books. And in the book, I read it, right after I got out of college, and it said there's a line in it that said if you were in Dallas, like that was no man's land. Like if you got sent to Dallas by, I think it was Solomon Smith Barney in the book.
Interesting.
If you were equities in Dallas, like you might as well just resign and go find another job at another firm because you were basically put out to pasture. Well, it's completely the opposite now with Goldman moving here and everything that's happening. Like Dallas is kind of the place to be, and super exciting.
We really are the center of the country, and people don't talk about this enough. This might be one of my own little crazy observations or ideas, but we talk about how much DFW has helped, the airport has helped the region. I think it was air conditioning. I think more than anything, it was air conditioning because when my dad worked here, all those buildings downtown, the windows were open. The guys had to wear seersucker suits. Nobody in a New York wool suit wanted to come down. Yeah. And when they could close the windows and, turn on the AC, people started moving here. There really are, Texas is really more the center of the country than this Midwest we've been talking about. Chicago's not the center of the country.
Right.
It's just not. Yeah. And so I really think air conditioning changed and led to, and our land and other things.
I think you're onto something there.
No one's going to disagree, I don't think, that it's one of the greatest inventions of all time.
Right.
What, from your seat, what are the threats to DFW? What if you said you don't want us to get too big for our britches? What would the threats be to us going backwards or losing our mojo?
Well, I think that, again, we have a great head of transportation to help us with our growth. I know Atlanta obviously struggled when it became so popular with transportation issues. We have a lot more land than they do, and so hopefully we can accommodate that and learn from the lessons that they've shared with us or that we've observed ourselves. I think that that the messiness of the world is something, Dallas likes. We like controlled growth. And so I think trying to be all things to all people kind of comes a little bit with its own potential downfalls. So I think, but it also is part of our charm. Mm-hmm. So I think we just have to be, as long as we remain comfortable with the discomfort, I think we'll be fine. But I do think that there is, it's like any kind of growth spurt. It's going to have some pains along the way. Mm-hmm. And I think we just need to have kind of a long-term approach to our growth and really be aware of to Scott's point, our possibilities rather than thinking of ourselves still in this little bit of a, smaller than way.
Yep.
Because really a lot is possible. And so again, it's part of our charm that we don't have this huge ego. And that we get excited when people come visit, but at the same time, it prevents us from thinking so big, I think. So we just need to be careful not to do anything to shoot ourselves in the foot.
It's interesting. I would think if someone's not from Texas or not from Dallas, for someone like you who's really on the inside of the Dallas, to hear you say that we don't think a lot of ourselves, because the Texas mantra is obviously everything's bigger in Texas. Other people out there would say, really? But to your point, on the inside, we've kind of had a little bit of this chip on our shoulder So
we have a bravado, but we still have a humility.
Yeah.
You know, we have a very kind of homespun humility that's underneath that bravado.
Yeah. It's well said.
What's the future for you? What's the future for Kit, and kind of where do you see your career? Klyde Warren, you've talked a little bit about that. What's you look
next?
out 3-5 years, what's next?
So, well, I've got 2 daughters in New York now. One's working, and one is a sophomore at NYU. So I hope to be there, you know, as much as I can. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, you know, to your point. I mean, we have a lot of things that we need to prepare for with all the people who are here. And hopefully that will include a lot more pedestrian traffic. As Dallas becomes a city that knits itself. You know, we're an automobile age city, right? So we're retrofitting.
Yep.
Some of these other cities, you know, weren't built at the same time. For me professionally, you know, I'd love to be at Klyde Warren Park until I retire. I'd love to see our expansion happen and really complete the park. I'd love to work with these other parks that are being built, not only around Dallas, but around the rest of the country, continue to do that. I think it's an important thing to, again, be spreading this gospel of green, which makes me laugh, being a native Dallasite, that anybody's talking to us about. I mean, Klyde Warren Park's a postage stamp of a park. It's itty bitty, you know, to have.
But if you go from total darkness to a little bit of light,
I know.
It looks really bright, which is why Klyde Warren's a little bit of light and a lot of darkness.
That's true. I mean, I'm hoping that the Trinity River plans all, you know, solidify, because if Klyde Warren Park is Bryant Park, that can be Central Park, you know, to continue with the New York analogy. You know, I would love to be a part of that and see how this can just continue to be the gift that keeps on giving, because it's exceeded everyone's expectations wildly. So I'd love to be a part of that for as long as I can be.
I have a couple questions as we, one, you mentioned that you were being in the room with the CEOs, and there was the Palm Beach. Do you have any specifics you recall? What were the CEOs' input to Palm Beach leaders? Do you remember any specifics? Do this, don't do that. Any pragmatic things that you recall from that meeting?
You know, they're trying to work with multiple counties as well. And so they were very interested in our regional collaboration. And so we informed them of the pros and cons of our regional collaboration, because it's not perfect, right?
Sure.
But you know, one of the things that I got most excited about, again, back to our transportation, is hearing about the wayfinding that we're beginning to really focus on, that is being shared with others in a way that we've never had before. You know, we just kind of built highways, built streets, kind of created all that. And now there's people movers, you know, that are going to be state of the art. There are vehicle movers that are going to be state of the art, because we have the land to get things from point A to point B, you know, with the new Amazon facility and just a lot of our these incredible warehouses and things. I think we're going to be really leading the country with a lot of that tech, which I think is exciting. But, you know, everyone has different issues, but I really don't think anybody approaches it from a financial perspective the way we do with this. You know, we will lend you the money to create something. We hope it works out. You know, that risk taking is something that's uniquely Texas.
I think so too.
Well said. Yeah.
And because they're all waiting for their money to come in to do their things, you know, and we're like, no, let's do this, and then you can get the money later. That's not anywhere else, really, nowhere else.
Yeah. Really, it's really interesting. What I just heard you say there is a lot of cities need to take calculated risks.
Right.
They've got to be more. They got to be less risk averse.
Right. And work together, which is why I want Dallas is trying to come up with, what could our big event be? You know, what can our Lollapalooza or ACL or any of that kind of stuff be? That's going to take some collaboration, because when people come here, they might be here for a Cowboys game, which puts them automatically in Arlington. They might stay at a hotel that's in Grapevine. But in their minds, they're coming to Dallas.
Right.
You know, so I very much feel like we have got to all figure out a way to continue this, because Dallas is going to be renamed Dallas Stadium, right, during the World Cup. people still think of this region as Dallas. So we need to not have this attitude. That's where our modesty comes in, where we're still trying to strive to get some kind of identity, which we already have. And so we need to be, open-minded and strong enough to think about that, to think about Dallas as North Texas, and know that we've already got incredible things happening here. So how can we leverage off these others to make our region, bigger and better?
Well, and from a firm that has a very strong presence in Fort Worth, and two people who absolutely love Fort Worth, I'm sure you do as well. What's happening in Fort Worth? Is there anything happening like Klyde Warren? Obviously, Sundance they had it somewhat of a green space. Where's Fort Worth? Because I clearly hear you say more collaboration, collaboration.
I think, I don't really know exactly where Fort Worth is now. I can tell you that, so after one of my previous jobs was I was in charge of all the events for the Super Bowl when the Super Bowl came to Dallas. I had a 2.5, 3-year job putting on 40 major events across the region. The stadium was going to be in Arlington, right? It was not, and it was being built at the time, right, when I started my job. It's not in Dallas. We've got to get over that. And we've got to realize that actually can be helpful in a way to pull the regions together. Mm-hmm. We put together Bill Lively's idea. We put together a council of mayors that sounded like it was like one of those superhero councils or something. But there were more than 100 mayors on this council of mayors. I think it was like 140 or 112 or something mayors. And we got them all together and we talked about regional issues. We had events in Fort Worth and Dallas and in Arlington. We had a concert series that I put on, and we had a concert in each of these places. Bill Lively really said, we're going to carry this regional banner and focus on this North Texas. That's kind of about the time when Dallas this area started being called North Texas and not the Metroplex anymore. It was with the North Texas Super Bowl. And it's just a much better name, let's face it, than Metroplex. It wasn't going to be called the Metroplex Super Bowl. But, I do think that continuing to have our leadership, our convention and visitors bureaus and others work together, our mayors work together, it all goes back to the collaboration thing we talked about when we were discussing CEOs. Yep. It's time consuming, and it seems like it's maybe taking your eye off the ball of just your little window, but there are ways to pull together that just make it a much bigger world and will, the rising tide floats all boats, right?
That's what I keep, that halo effect is what I keep hearing. Let's land the plane here, Kit. You got 1,000 CEOs in the room, and talk to us about why philanthropy is positive for companies.
Well, I think that philanthropy done right is positive for companies. I mean, it's positive in that it is a way to pull people in and kind of meet them where they are. There are different ways of going about it. Companies are incredibly generous and do matching gifts, so people can give where they want to give. And they also do days now where people can go out and volunteer. All that is just incredibly good for people feeling like they're engaged with their communities, which leads to happiness. They're not just chained to their desks all the time. So it's important for keeping employees happy. Also in a city like Dallas, where you meet people by getting involved philanthropically, whether it's a board you serve on or whether it's a volunteer opportunity. It's critical for networking, and it does it in a way that's just less in your face than, my corporate counsel, for example, I'll have a corporate council member who wants to meet someone who's not involved with us, who should be involved with us because maybe they're right near the park. They now utilize the corporate council to reach out to that individual and say, hey, I want to talk to you about Klyde Warren Park. We're involved in Klyde Warren Park. We'd love for you to be too. You're right on the park. We'd love to just take you out to lunch and tell you a little bit more about it. And they'll bring me along. Well, guess what? They've now established a business connection with that person without saying, hey, I'd like for you to be a client of mine or whatever it might be. Right. And they've connected in kind of a third, it's a third thing, in a third way. So I think it can be, good not only for just internal purposes and employee morale purposes, but for business.
It's awesome. Kit, thank you very much. Thank you thank you for investing time with Decision Points, and grateful for your leadership. And we're certainly grateful for the green space that you've brought, and you continue to lead and grow in Dallas.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed visiting with both of you.
Thank you very much.